Here is the story. Kofi was known throughout the village of Azampi as the son of the great Kwaku, a rich and powerful businessman. Kwaku owned cocoa plantations, businesses, and even trucks that transported goods to the capital. Thanks to this, his family had never lacked anything. Kofi, being an only child, had grown up surrounded by everything he wanted: imported toys, luxury clothes, and an education in the best schools. But despite all this, he had one major flaw: his arrogance. Since he was a teenager, Kofi believed that his father's money could buy everything. If someone reproached him for something, he would respond with contempt, "You don't know who you're talking to. I am the son of Kwaku, the richest man in Azampi." And if he couldn't find an answer, he would simply take a banknote out of his pocket, as if to prove that money solved everything. This attitude greatly irritated the villagers, but no one dared to confront him directly. After all, who would want to attract the wrath of the most influential family in the village? Azampi was not a village like any other. It was surrounded by green hills and sparkling rivers. In the center of the village stood a large sacred tree, a giant baobab, which, according to the elders, was more than 200 years old. The people of Azampi deeply respected their traditions. Every year, a great ceremony was held to honor the ancestors and bless the king, Nanan Eyel, who ruled the village with wisdom. This ceremony was not just a celebration, it was a sacred moment when everyone, rich or poor, came to pay homage to the village's protective spirits. However, Kofi had never shown much interest in these traditions. He found it all useless. Why waste time dancing around a tree or listening to stories about ancestors who have long been dead, he often said to his friends. His best friend, Yo, sometimes tried to reason with him. Yo was different from Kofi. Although he came from a humble family, he deeply respected the village customs and believed in the teachings of the elders. Kofi, you don't understand. It's not just about beliefs. These traditions are part of our identity. If we forget them, we will lose what makes us unique, he would tell Yo. But Kofi, with his mocking smile, always replied, Yo, you believe in this nonsense because you are poor. I don't need traditions. I have money, and that's all that matters. One day, as the annual festival approached, drums began to resonate throughout the village. The women were preparing the colorful loincloths they wore for the dance, and the men were repairing their musical instruments. King Nanan Eyel, dressed in his royal robes, was supervising the preparations from his palace. Everyone was busy, except Kofi, who was lounging in a chaise longue in front of his house. Kofi, aren't you going to join the party? His mother asked as she came out with a basket of fruit. What for? These drums are giving me a headache, he replied, yawning. His mother, who was more respectful of tradition, frowned. Kofi, you can't live like this. You must learn to respect the values of your people. But Kofi, as always, ignored her words. The day of the party arrived, and the entire village gathered in the large royal courtyard. The drums beat a lively rhythm, and the dancers circled the sacred tree. Nanan Eyel, seated on his golden throne, watched with dignity. The ceremony was grand, and even the usually boisterous children remained calm in the face of the solemnity of the occasion. But Kofi was nowhere to be seen. He arrived late, dressed in a red silk shirt and shiny shoes, as if he were going to a social gathering. The villagers watched him enter with a mixture of admiration and displeasure. Some murmured among themselves, "Look at that boy. He thinks he's above everything." But Kofi paid no attention. He headed straight for Yo, who was sitting at the back of the courtyard. "Yo, why do you bother coming here? You could be at home resting," he said with a laugh. But Yo replied seriously, "Kofi, today is a special day. Show some respect. This is important to the village." Kofi shrugged. "This is all to impress the elders. I don't believe in this story of blessings." As the rituals continued, Kofi began to get restless. He looked around, looking for something to pass the time. Yo, these drums are tiring me out. I'm going for a walk. Are you coming? Yo held his head. No, Kofi. Stay here. Don't do anything stupid. But Kofi, annoyed, got up and left the courtyard without listening to his friend. Walking around the palace, Kofi found himself in front of a large wooden door. The door was decorated with traditional patterns and looked very old. A small sign hung on it read, "No entry." But to Kofi, this kind of warning made no sense. Forbidden for who? Not for me, he muttered as he pushed the door open. What he saw inside left him speechless. Pushing open the door, Kofi discovers a large, majestic room. The walls were decorated with ancient paintings depicting war scenes, rituals, and kings of the past. The ceiling was decorated with intricate carvings, and in the center of the room was the royal throne, a seat made of solid gold, set with precious stones. The throne was raised on a wooden platform, surrounded by small statues representing the village's protective spirits. Kofi approached slowly, his eyes wide. He had never seen anything so beautiful. So this is their famous sacred throne, he murmured with a smirk. They talk about ancestors, blessings, but it's all just gold and stones. Kofi stepped onto the platform, stopped in front of the throne, and placed a hand on it. He felt the coldness of the metal under his fingers and began to laugh. Is this the source of their power? A simple shiny chair. Suddenly, a crazy idea crossed his mind. He looked around to make sure he was alone. The room was silent, and not a shadow moved. Kofi then lowered his pants and, with a defiant smile, he urinated on the royal throne. The golden liquid flowed over the ornaments and carvings, defiling the most sacred object in the village. Kofi laughed to himself, proud of his gesture. Let's see if the ancestors dare to punish me, he said, straightening up. But before he could leave the room, he heard a noise. A door suddenly opened, and an old man entered. It was Tokbai Komlan, the head priest of the village, known for his wisdom and calm temperament. But at this moment, his face expressed cold anger. His eyes fixed Kofi with terrifying intensity. What have you done, young man? He demanded in a deep voice. Kofi, surprised, took a step back. But his arrogance quickly takes over. Nothing serious, old man. I just came to see this famous throne up close. It's just an object, after all. The priest slowly advances, without looking away. You have desecrated the sacred throne, he says. It is not just an object. It is the seat of the ancestors' blessings. It is through this throne that our king receives their strength and protection. And you, with your arrogance, have dared to defile this sacred bond. Kofi burst out laughing. Sacred. Your stories of ancestors are only legends to scare children. I do not believe in this nonsense. If your spirits are so powerful, let them come and punish me. The priest grabs his head, disappointed and angry. He raised his hand to Kofi and said, Young man, you have insulted our ancestors. You have challenged their power. From now on, their wrath will follow you everywhere. You will know no rest, no peace, until you pay for your arrogance. The priest's words echoed through the room like a clap of thunder. Kofi felt a shiver run down his spine, but he refused to show that he was afraid. Continue with your threats, old man. I'm fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to the party. Kofi left the room at a brisk pace, leaving the priest behind. But no sooner had he reached the royal court than something strange began to happen. An unusual fatigue took hold of him. His legs felt heavy, and his head was spinning. He tried to sit down next to Yo, but he couldn't concentrate on what his friend was saying. The drums that were resonating around him seemed to grow louder and louder, as if they were playing directly in his head. Kofi, are you okay? Yo asked, worried. Kofi took the lead. Yeah, it's just the heat. Nothing serious. But inside, he felt that something was wrong. That night, back home, Kofi collapsed on his bed, exhausted. As soon as he closed his eyes, he found himself in a strange dream. He was in a dark forest, surrounded by disturbing noises. The trees seemed to move, as if they were alive. In the center of the forest, he saw a light that glowed faintly. As he approached, he discovered the royal throne, but this time, it was surrounded by blurry silhouettes. The silhouettes whispered words he did not understand, but he knew they were talking about him. You have soiled our bond. You paid. Kofi tried to flee, but his legs refused to move. He felt a weight on his chest, as if something was crushing him. Finally, he woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. He got up from his light, still out of breath, and lit a lamp. The room was empty, but he felt like someone was watching him. It's just a bad dream, he whispered to reassure himself. But deep down, a small voice told him that it wasn't just a dream. Kofi grabbed his head, deciding to ignore the feeling. I'm not going to let this ancestor stuff bother me. It's just coincidences. The next day, things got worse. As soon as he stepped outside his house, he felt a strange tension in the air. The villagers' gazes seemed more intense than usual. Even the children playing in the street stopped to stare at him in silence. Kofi walked quickly to Yo's house, hoping to find some comfort there. But no sooner had he arrived than Yo noticed his condition. Kofi, you look tired. Are you sure you're okay? Kofi avoided the question. It's nothing, just a bad sleep. But that night, the drums started again. They echoed in his head so loud that he thought he was going crazy. He got up to check if there was a party in the village, but everything was quiet. The only thing he could hear was the sound of crickets in the night. Yet, in his mind, the drums continued, incessant. This time, he knew that something strange was happening. He thought back to the priest's words, "You will know neither rest nor peace." Despite his growing fear, Kofi still refused to accept that he was cursed. He thought that with time, everything would get better. But in the following days, the incidents became even stranger. He saw shadows moving in the rooms of his house, even when he was alone. Sometimes, he heard whispers, voices whispering his name. Every night, the dreams became more terrifying. The ancestors pursued him, looking at him with eyes filled with anger. Kofi, be accountable. Kofi, beg for forgiveness. One night, while he was alone in his room, he felt a presence behind him. He turned around abruptly, but there was nothing. However, he clearly felt a cold breath on his face. Panicked, Kofi ran out of his house and took refuge at Yo's. Yo, I think something is wrong. I'm being chased, he said, trembling. Yo, although worried, remained calm. Kofi, you know what you have to do. Go sit up by Comlan. He's the only one who can help you. But Kofi, true to his arrogance, replied, I don't need that old priest. I'll find the solution myself. Yo sighed, but he knew his friend had to hit rock bottom before he would change. Kofi spent another restless night, unable to sleep. The drums in his head kept beating, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silhouette of the ancestors. He woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, short of breath. This time, he didn't even try to convince himself that everything was okay. He knew something was wrong, but his pride still kept him from taking the first step toward Top by Comlan. In the morning, he left his house with dark circles under his eyes. The villagers looked at him strangely, some whispering among themselves. An old woman, known for her visions, approached him as he walked through the market. Kofi, I sense a heavy energy around you. You've disturbed something sacred, haven't you? She said in a deep voice. Kofi avoided her gaze and replied, "Come on, old lady, leave me alone. I'm not interested in your stories of curses." But deep down, he felt a fear growing inside him. That night, things took an even more terrifying turn. As he sat in his room, required reading to distract himself, he heard a strange noise coming from the yard behind his house. A dull noise, as if someone was hitting the ground with a stick. He got up to check, but when he opened the door, he saw nothing. Everything seemed normal. However, when he closed the door, the noise recommenced, this time louder. Kofi, although hesitant, went back outside with a lamp. "Who's there?" he shouted into the night. But no one answered. Suddenly, he felt a gust of icy wind sweep across his face. His lamp flickered and went out. He found himself in total darkness. "It's nothing, just the wind," he murmured to reassure himself. But at that moment, he heard a voice. A deep voice, coming from nowhere, whispering his name. "Kofi, you have defiled what is sacred. Be accountable." Panicked, he dropped his lamp and ran inside, slamming the door behind him. His heart was pounding so hard he felt like it was going to explode. The next day, Kofi went to see Yo. This time, he was different. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a palpable fear. "Yo, I think I made a mistake," he confessed quietly. Yo nodded. "Finally, you admit it. Now, listen to me. Go see Togbai Komlan. Only he can help you." Kofi hesitated for a moment, but he knew his friend was right. He couldn't go on like this. Later that day, Kofi went to the shrine where the priest resided. Togbai Komlan was sitting on a raffia mat, surrounded by gods and ritual objects. When Kofi entered, the priest didn't even look up. "I knew you would come," he said calmly. Kofi knelt before him, something he had never done before. "I'm sorry, Master. I shouldn't have done what I did. Please help me," he said, his voice shaking. The priest was silent for a moment, then replied, "You have arrogantly defied the ancestors. You have desecrated what is sacred. The wrath of the spirits is upon you, and it will not go away easily." Kofi lowered his head, ashamed. "What must I do to earn their forgiveness?" he demanded. Togbai Komlan looked at him seriously. "You must prove your sincerity. It will not be easy. The ancestors will test you, and if you fail, they will destroy you." The priest explained that he had to go to a sacred cave on a hilltop outside the village. There he would spend 3 days alone, without food or water, praying for forgiveness from the ancestors. During this time, the priest and the village elders would perform rituals to further his purification. "You will have to show that your repentance is sincere. If you lie, the ancestors will know," Togbai Komlan added. Kofi agreed, although he was afraid. The next day, he prepared for the journey. Yo insisted on accompanying him to the foot of the hill. "Kofi, be strong. I know you can do it," he told him before letting him go. The climb to the cave was difficult. The path was steep and covered in stones. Kofi, weakened by his sleepless nights, had difficulty moving forward. But he finally reached the entrance of the cave just before sunset. Inside, the cave was dark and silent. Tree roots hung from the ceiling, and drops of water splashed on the ground with an eerie echo. Kofi sat down on a stone and began to pray, as the priest had told him. "Ancestors, I am sorry for what I have done. Forgive me, I beg you," he whispered over and over again. But on the very first night, the visions began again. He saw the royal throne, surrounded by flames, and the silhouettes of the ancestors looking at him with glowing eyes. "You want our forgiveness, but is your heart truly sincere?" demanded one of the spirits. Kofi tried to answer, but his voice would not come out. He woke up with a start, shaking with fear. The next 2 days were even more trying. Kofi, hungry and thirsty, struggled to keep his mind clear. The visions grew more and more intense, and the voices of the ancestors seemed to echo throughout the cave. At one point, he felt as if the walls were closing in on him. "This is a test," he repeated to himself to give himself courage. "I must hold on." On the third day, when he was exhausted, Kofi had one last dream. This time, he saw King Nanan Eyel, seated on his throne, surrounded by a soothing light. The king said to him, "Kofi, your arrogance has led you to your downfall, but your repentance is sincere. The ancestors agree to forgive you, but remember, if you make such a mistake again, their anger will be final." When he woke up, Kofi felt a strange lightness. The drums in his head had stopped, and he no longer heard the voices of the ancestors. When he went back down the hill, he found Yor and Togbai Komlan waiting for him. The priest nodded with a smile. "The ancestors have forgiven you. But do not forget their warning." Kofi, now humble, knelt before the priest and thanked him. After his return from the sacred cave, Kofi was a changed man. The entire village of Azangpi was curious to see him again. Some had heard of his journey, while others knew only rumors, often exaggerated, that he had seen spirits dancing around him or that he had fought a supernatural creature to save his life. When he arrived in the village courtyard, all eyes were on him. Yor walked beside him, but Kofi no longer presented the arrogant boy that everyone knew. He walked with his head down, his shoulders slightly hunched, a sign of his new state of mind, humility. Togbai Komlan, the old priest, waited in the center of the courtyard. At his side stood King Nanan Eyel, dressed in his royal loincloth and traditional jewelry. There was total silence when Kofi stepped forward and knelt before them. He bowed his head and declared in a trembling voice, "I ask forgiveness from the king, the priest, the elders, and especially the ancestors that I have insulted. I recognize my mistakes. I promise to live with respect and humility from this day forward." The villagers, at first surprised, began to murmur among themselves. This Kofi was not the one they knew. Something profound had changed in him. Togbai Komlan placed a caring hand on Kofi's shoulder and said, "The ancestors have forgiven you, but their trust is fragile. Prove by your actions that you have learned from your mistakes." The king nodded and added, "Kofi, the village of Azangpi is a big family. We all make mistakes, but the important thing is to recognize them and make amends. I give you my blessing to start over." The villagers applauded shyly, then louder, until the courtyard resounded with singing and dancing. Kofi, for the first time, felt both liberated and accepted. Kofi did not immediately return to his normal life. He spent several weeks helping out in the village, something he had never done before. He accompanied Yor to the fields, working with the elders to repair damaged boxes, and participated in religious ceremonies without complaint. The villagers were skeptical at first. Some said, "He's doing this to make amends, but he'll go back to his old ways." Others thought his change was genuine. But day by day, Kofi showed that he was determined to prove that he had changed. One day, as he walked with a group of women carrying water from the river to the village, an old woman, Nana Efra, stopped him. She put down her bucket and said, "Kofi, you have insulted our traditions, but today you are working for our community. The ancestors are watching you, and I'm sure they are proud of you." These words touched Kofi, and he knelt down to thank her. "Thank you, Nana Efra. I don't want to be the same person I was before. I want to be worthy of this village." A few months after Kofi's purification, another big ceremony was planned. This time, the elders decided to give Kofi a special role in the rituals, a sign of their newfound confidence. He was to carry a symbolic offering to the sacred tree, a privilege reserved for those who had proven their respect for traditions. Kofi accepted this responsibility seriously. But things did not go as planned. During the ceremony, a stranger arrived in the village. He was tall, dressed in modern clothes, and introduced himself as Tono, a man from the city who had come to trade with Azangpi. But as soon as he arrived, Tono began to mock the rituals. "Look at them. Dancing around a tree as if it was going to give them money. You are wasting your time with these superstitions," he said, laughing. The villagers, shocked, murmured among themselves. Tono continued, "These traditions are useless. I come from the city. Over there, they don't believe in these stories of ancestors." The king and Togbai Komlan looked at Kofi. The latter, although annoyed by Tono's words, remained calm. He stepped forward and said, "Tono, you are our guest here. We respect our traditions, and we hope that you will respect them too, even if you do not understand them." Tono burst out laughing. "You are the one who calls yourself Kofi, aren't you? I know your story. You pretend to be changed, but deep down, you are no different from me. Ancestors do not exist." Kofi clenched his fist, but he remembered the priest's words, "Show by your actions that you have changed." He took a deep breath and replied calmly, "Tono, everyone has the right to believe what they want. But here in Azangpi, our traditions are our strength. If you don't want to participate, no one is forcing you to. But don't disrespect those who believe in them." These words impressed the villagers, and even Tono seemed taken aback. The priest nodded with a discreet smile, satisfied with Kofi's answer. At the end of the ceremony, as Kofi placed the offering at the foot of the sacred tree, a strange event occurred. A light breeze blew through the village, making the leaves of the tree dance. The drums stopped frequently, and everyone remained still. Togbai Komlan raised his arms and said, "The ancestors have spoken. They accept Kofi as one of their own, a protector of our traditions." The villagers burst into cheers, and Kofi felt a comforting warmth fill his heart. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace. Years passed, and Kofi became a respected man throughout the village. He opened a school to teach young people about the importance of Azangpi's traditions and history. He worked alongside the king and the priest to protect the village's values while helping to modernize some aspects of daily life. His friendship with Yo grew even stronger, and together, they inspired a new generation to respect their culture. Kofi often shares his story with young people. "I thought money could buy everything, but I was wrong. True worth is knowing where you come from and respecting those who came before you." The children listened with fascination, and his story became a lesson passed down through the generations. No matter how rich or educated you are, always respect the beliefs and traditions of those around you. Humility and respect are forces that can transform a life, like Kofi's. Never underestimate the power of ancestors or the values that built your community.